Hello, my name is George Cunningham. I'm a native of Roscrea. This town is heritage town in County Tipperary, right in the heart of Ireland, and it will be my pleasure to bring you around Monaincha, one of Ireland's most sacred places. In fact, believe it or not, the 31st wonder of the world, but more of that anon. We're here in Roscrea because Roscrea was the home place of Cronan, who founded a monastery, and Roscrea grew as a monastic city. It didn't start here. Cronan started out in a wooded place, a little outside the town. We'll visit that on our next stop in Shanross. But this was a secluded place, an Átaír Gúlta, and travellers couldn't find him. And so he came in and he founded his monastery here on the Slighe Dhála, on one of the great 5 roads of Ireland. But there are more than just one here. Roscrea is very much on a crossroads, the north-south corridor going up to the monasteries like Dara and Rahan and all those up there in Offaly, and coming down to Cashel. And then coming across from Mahabow and Clonena, Kildare, across to Laura and Terryglass. So Roscrea very much on the crossroads, and the monastery was founded here by Cronan. What Cronan looked like, we don't know, but several people have tried to imagine him, including the sculptor Seamus Murphy. Nothing remains of the early monastery, nothing in situ, that is, because it was all of earth and wattle or timber. But we have artefacts that survive from the early times, including this beautiful cross slab of Roscrea, which is now in the museum, but was in the graveyard of St. Cronan's. The monastery became busy and commercial and probably became very much secular. The evidence for this comes from the 2 outstanding pieces we have of metalwork and manuscript. One is the Roscrea brooch, now in the National Museum, beautiful silver brooch with gold filigree and amber studs. And, of course, the Book of Dima, which is an 8th century gospel book, 9th century, but around the year 800, if you think of all of those. It's in Trinity College Library. Our illustration shows St. Mark, one of the evangelists, redrawn by calligrapher Tim O'Neill. And then a recent dig, where the new shopping centre is, showed that that side of the monastery was the industrial heart. Now, we haven't got any dating evidence yet, but they found a lot of pits for commercial activity there. And, of course, this activity led to raids by the Vikings and the famous Battle of Roscrea, where they raided the Éanach Roscrea. And all this led probably to a desire by some of the monks of Roscrea to get back to a more humble, simple life. And they became part of the Slighe Dhála, the spiritual reform movement. And we do know from the annals that a group left Roscrea, bringing with them nothing but the bread of Roscrea, back out to the island, a little island in the middle of the bog, in the middle of Lough Crea, which Cronan had used, first of all, and Canis as well of Ahabow. And they went back there, and this became the hermitage site attached still to Roscrea, and it became quite famous for its asceticism and began to attract pilgrims. And the first Slighe Dhála means handmaid of God, or Culdies was another popular name for them, was Hilary, or Hilaire the scribe. And the annals say that in the year 807, Hilary, anchoret and scribe, fell asleep in Christ on the island of Lough Crea. And interesting that he was a scribe. I wonder, had he anything to do with the writing of the Book of Dima? The link between Roscrea and its hermitage site, there's little bits of evidence. For example, the boat, the one-masted sailing ship that's on the round tower, pointing in the window that is in the direction of Monaincha. And it really is ironic that the most landlocked town in Ireland should have the oldest pictorial representation of a sailing ship, which is there on the tower. But as today's pilgrims, as pilgrims of today, of the 3rd millennium, let's go out to Monaincha. But first of all, we have to visit the cradle of Christianity in Roscrea, that is Shanross. We're at Shanross, which was the site of Cronan's original monastery. Shanross meaning the old wood, which of course now is the site of St. Anne's. It is a school, and a centre for children and adults with physical and mental disability. The map you're looking at is a map from about 1800 that shows Corval. Corval is the modern name for the Shanross area, and then down into Inish Namio, which is the island of the living, or Monaincha itself. And from here, Cronan left this wooded area and into Roscrea, as you can see from Mary Arrigan's cartoon. What's left of Shanross now is just the medieval church, because the Cronan went from here, from Shanross, out to Monaincha. You're at the edge of the lake here, because all of this area was Lough Cray, and the island which we're speaking of, the Holy Island, is about a mile, I suppose, from here as the crow flies. Shanross seems to have been not inhabited for a good while. And then in the Middle Ages, the monks on the main island came back here because they couldn't put up with the dampness on the Holy Island. And they built this little medieval church that you see here. They came back from the main island in about 1480s. But the architectural features, as you see on this particular church here, are 15th century. You can see it's a simple little church. You can see the windows there with the ogee heads are probably around 1500. It's very much a ruin now, and we are endeavouring to have the state take it into state care. And it's the final piece, if you like, of the heritage jigsaw of Roscrea as regards its architectural remains. Shanross is the parish of Corbally. And the parish of Corbally was very much the site of the O'Machers. The secular princes of the territory here, the overall territory is Éile, Eli O'Carroll, and the O'Carrolls were the chieftains, and a subsept of those were the O'Machers. And the O'Machers became prior of the island of Monaincha right throughout the Middle Ages. And there were priors and there were letters. It features very much in the calendar of papal letters and calendar of papal registers, asking the O'Machers or the priors to do things for the Pope or for the Vatican itself. And Icairn is their barony, and here at Corbally, in this little graveyard, was probably the burial places of the O'Machers. What's also here in the graveyard is this lovely little late 18th century tombstone called the Help of God series, with all of the features of the Passion on it, even with Christ as the Son God on it. It's just a small little piece of folk art there. And then the parish of Roscrea and Monaincha, there were two parishes, one connected with the monastic lands of Monaincha called Corbally, and the other was Roscrea parish itself. And the map shows you as they were. That map incidentally drawn for Dermot Leeson's book on Roscrea town and parish. Today, St. Anne's is the centre, as I say, for a school for those with disability. But now our journey will take us, not as the two lads here in the boat rowing across from the Gerald Barry illustration. We can go dry foot to the Holy Island. We're now standing on Ladies' Island. Now, it could be the island that ladies could attend, or it could be an island that was dedicated to the Blessed Virgin. We're not sure of which. This is the second of the two islands. Believe it or not, you have walked, travelled however you have travelled from Shanross to here. You came dry foot. But if you were travelling here 200 years ago, you couldn't have come this way. You would have had to come across by boat, because this was Lough Cray. The Lake of Cray, which was a huge drainage programme, a bog drainage programme about the 1800s, where the water level was lowered. So then the two islands came, they were always there, small gravel mounds, not very big. And these two islands here, the bog map here of 1814 shows you, and you can see it recently drained. It doesn't show you the two islands. We have a map of that to show you. The bog map is extremely interesting, and you can see the names of the Inish Namio, the island of the living, more of that anon. And in Monaincha itself was a very famous place throughout history. In fact, Monaincha itself was Ireland's, Munster's most famous place of pilgrimage, so it was well known throughout the Middle Ages. And the down survey map of the 17th century there shows you it's named, you can see it marked on it there as Inishnemio. And then we're so fortunate to have a map or an illustration of the two islands before they were drained by Ledwidge. Ledwidge was an antiquarian and he was director of Ahabo. And he wrote the Antiquities of Ireland, first edition, 1790. And he actually shows you the two islands, the main island to the right and the small one that we're on, Ladies Island itself, there before they were drained. And then we have a plan, of course, of today's island with the houses on it. Also, just to remind you that this Roscrea itself was part of the great bog of Ely. People still draw turf from here of the bogs, because the road we're on there, that is a dead end. It's cut off by the Nore. So you have Birch's Bog or Tamooney Bog. And as a young lad, one of my earliest memories was going on the bar of my father's bike down to turn turf, and then getting Paddy Feary's ass and cart to draw home the turf. And incidentally, just about that, we passed by here as a young lad, Monaincha, so many times. I never saw it. Never knew anything about it at all. It was gone from the memory, from the common memory of people. Anyway, we're here on the second island today, and the ramparts up to 25 years ago still existed on the island. Sadly, they're gone too. Fragments of the Romanesque remains are found in the garden here. And on Ladies Island, up to a few years ago, you had this chevron, the Romanesque remains there. But the two islands really became famous, or were made famous, by Gerald Barry of Wales, Geraldus Cambrensis, the Anglo-Norman chronicler, who heard about this story up here in North East Munster, because you're right here in North East Munster. He heard about this story on which nobody could die. He heard a story about on one island no female could go onto the island and all of this, and if a female bird touched the trees, they would drop dead and all of that. He mixed up the whole story about the sort of dying was connected with your soul. It was a soul in sin was what it was. But he told this story in his book, title of which you see there, The Topography of Ireland, about the two islands on which one of them which nobody could die, but when you felt infirmed and old and you were fed up with the world, you took yourself off the island and you died elsewhere. So the story was continued. But he wrote about it and he spoke about it in Oxford, and the story went around the then known world, and it came back to Ireland and was recorded in the Book of Ballymote as the 31st wonder of the world. Insula Viventium, the island of the living, in Irish, Inshnemio, the island of the living. It's a lovely story, and you're on one of these islands now. Now you're at the edge of the main island, a 3-acre little island as it was, still called, as I said, the Holy Island. It's 200 years since it was an island. And you're looking across at the beech trees which frame the little Romanesque nave and chancel church, which is 12th century. But I want you to again here to bring your mind back to what it was like. And again, the Ledwidge map shows you the main island there, with the abbot's apartments, with the orchards and the fish ponds, and there were 2 churches there as well. The ruins of today, what we see there, are all 12th century, except maybe the cross base is a bit older. But in this, the 2 principal saints associated with Monaincha, Cronan of Roscrea and Canis of Acabo. Now, Acabo, as the crow flies, is about, I suppose, 8 miles from here. Acabo is between Borsanossery and Balacolla. Famous monastery there, which was the principal church of the Diocese of Ossory after Sarkirn, before it was transferred to Kilkenny. And in both the saints' lives, they tell the story about the saints used Monaincha. Now, the saints' lives, you see, are all 12th century. So what they're actually doing in the lives is they're both claiming the land. They're both claiming the monastery. I mean, these 12th century saints' lives are nothing so much about the saint at the time, but they tell an awful lot about the 12th century. So we're told that Canis from Acabo walked from Acabo to here to get away from his monks. He had some troublesome monks over there in Ahabo, and he wanted to get away from them, and they couldn't find him. And eventually he was found by a hunter, and then it tells about that a horse used to travel daily with messages back from Ahabo to Monaincha. It's also recorded that Canis wrote a copy of the Gospels here called the Las Canic. They're lost. Wouldn't it be wonderful if someday, just like the Psalter at Fadamore, that they were found? Cronan used the Monaincha itself as a place of retreat, and in fact it is recorded that he gave the last rites to St. Malua here on the island. What you were looking at there was just the Ledwidge print again of Ahabo itself. But Monaincha, as we look across now at the little ruin, in any season it's a beautiful place to visit. Pilgrims come here from all over the world. Visitors come here from all over the world, and we're going to go over now and just stand in front of the west door and the cross and have a look at what is to be seen there. What you have now in front of you is you have the high cross and the west doorway. We have again a Ledwidge print of about 1790 showing this scene of the west doorway. Again, we're fortunate that one of Ledwidge's antiquities that he illustrates in his book is the west doorway at Monaincha, showing the little church, second church there. And of course the cross itself at the time was much smaller. More about the cross in a moment. The west doorway is really a beautiful piece of work. It's in typical three orders with all decoration that is probably more suitable to manuscript than to stone, and it's reckoned to be at the later end of Irish Romanesque. There's very little animal features, in fact not on the doorway at all. You see one of our pictures there shows you the way the doorway is framed in snow through the beaches. It's a beautiful shot there. There's another print of O'Sullivan's Picturesque Tour of Ireland 1824, which has taken a lot of artistic I don't think it was like that. But on the doorway it was unusual that there was an inscription, or pray for somebody, which is, you can hardly read it now. The other main feature you're looking at, of course, is the cross, which was a high cross, but it lost its shaft at some time. And our sort of 20th century contribution to Monaincha was to put a cement shaft for the cross. We can see the mason's hand of many centuries. The cross base itself is probably earlier, although Peter Harbison says there's no reason why it shouldn't be the same time as the cross itself. The upper part of the cross, what survives is this clothed figure of Christ. You get the same thing on the cross in Roscrea, St. Cronan's cross, and the St. Patrick's cross in Cashel. Interesting, this one has no figure on the other side. The other two have, showing that probably bishops, and they're 12th century crosses. It's the time that we put main figures on the cross. The decoration on the cross base is in no coherent narrative arrangement, probably biblical scenes itself. The stone, one of the features about Monaincha, about the building, now the main building, forget about the adjunct or the part that was added to the left. That's much later, and we'll talk about that anon. But the stonework itself is superb. The mason's hand here is superb. And it was our great fortune at one of the early Roscrea conferences in 1992, I think it was, when we had Jim Kemmy, who was then the mayor of Limerick, but Jim was also a stonemason by trade. And Jim spoke here at Monaincha about how they built the monastery, the stone, the way the stone was laid. And people still remark on it, this simple man. I mean, Jim was a very sophisticated scholar, but a very simple man itself. And he came with a red rose in his pocket. And incidentally, I gave him a present of wine and books to thank him for coming. And he spoke about the mason's hand here. In fact, one of the surprises of Monaincha is how the stone was carried across in open, small canoes, fashioned out of trees. A new traveller through Ireland knew that was in 1812. He was absolutely astonished at the size of the stone. And if you ever want to hear a mouthful, here's one for you. He said about the abbey, "The circumstances which excite inexplicable perplexity about its erection is how the ponderous material of which it is constructed be possibly conveyed across a morass almost inaccessible. Now, you can repeat that after me if you want. What he meant, of course, is how the bloody hell did he get the big stones across on that? Some people think that they waited for ice for cold, and we don't know. Anyway, the church itself is really a beautiful piece of architecture. The plan of the church shows you what's outlined in black. The nave was where the public would stand, and then the chancel was the area in which Mass was celebrated, where the altar was. Looking back through the west doorway, and you can see the high cross is pictured there within it. But one of the features of Hiberno-Romanesque doorways, or early Irish doorways, was the small slant, and it's amazing the way you can appreciate architecture when you understand that. In the chancel, looking around to your right, you can see three windows. One that is very small, splayed, and the others are quite big. These were 13th century windows. When they got a few extra bob, the abbey was probably built as the ruins of which we're looking at now, by the Augustinian canons, sometime towards the latter part of the 13th century, and most likely came from the money generated by pilgrims, that it was quite a wealthy place. As you can see from the superb masonry and decoration that's there. I mean, this wasn't put up by a fly-by-night. This was somebody who had a master plan and then was able to execute that master plan. The windows, the big windows, are 13th century, when probably glass came in so that they could use, up to then they would have used pigskin or something like that. And very dark places, of course. On the windowsill of one of the 13th centuries, you see there this stone, which of course, the great story that's told about this was that when Cromwell was trying to find, or his soldiers were trying to find Monaincha so they could kill all the monks, and they couldn't find the island, they couldn't locate it, nobody would tell them how to get there. And they went down the streets of Roscrea, nobody would tell them, and they went down Limerick Street, and they banged on the door, and a woman was baking her loaf of bread, and she went out and answered the door, and she got so terrified she told them how to get out to Monaincha. And when she went back into her oven, the loaf of bread was turned into stone, and that's the stone that's there. It's a lovely story, but unfortunately, with all these good stories, it's probably the cap of a pillar. But the story is that that's a loaf of bread. It's tied up at Lot's wife and all things, like that. And many of the children of our locality won't tell you much about the Hiberno-Romanesque, but they'll all tell you about the stone and the loaf of bread. I've stood here on many occasions. I've stood when we were on pilgrimage with Callistus, Weir, with Greek Orthodox, Methodist, Anglicans, Christians, and so on, and we said a prayer for peace. But one of the times that I still remember was when the monks of Mount St. Joseph, the Cistercians, came and sung Vespers here in the Abbey at around 5 o'clock. And it was really something else. It was at the end of one of the conferences, just at the turn of the millennium. And then look at the chancel arch. Look at the decoration on that again. Look at the intricacies of the geometrical, and picture it as well. Probably highlighted, probably painted. We don't know what sort of a roof was on it. It could have been shingled, could have been thatched, but undoubtedly there would have been different elements or paint, around both the chancel and the nave itself. And then to the left you have this transeptal sacristy. It was built in the 15th century, much inferior. Have a look at the stone on the outside, and you see that it's rubble. So this is 300 or 400 years after the main one. So progress is not always forward. We have some grave slabs that were here. This is Urdo Brandov, which is now lost. There are 2 or 3 others, fragments of which remain. Our next stop is going to be, we'll go in to have a look at the vaulted area, but we go up the steps. There's sort of night steps that go up probably to the prior's apartment. There was never an abbot here. This was not an abbey, but the superior would have been the prior. As I said, he was mostly O'Machers, because O'Machers or the O'Mahers had control of the abbey. It's now, I think, time to sort of explain what made this place so famous, and it made its name really from the few monks that were here who were so holy that people came here on pilgrimage, and it became a very famous place of pilgrimage. As was said, probably Munster's most famous place of pilgrimage in medieval times, on a par with Croagh for Connacht and Lough Derg and Glendalough for Leinster. In fact, the story of pilgrims go back a long time. We know that Flahertuck, who was, believe it or not, he was abbot of Inishcohic, which is Scattery Isle, and became king of Cashel, came here in 920 on pilgrimage, but in fact he came to use the place as a sanctuary, because the annals record the following years that the Vikings of Limerick found him here and brought him back. But whatever happened, he squiggled out of the thing, and he actually ended up his life as king again. No stranger pilgrim than that man must have been there. And then we have in 1138 Drugan, the chief lector, the wisest man in Armagh, came all the way down from Armagh and died in Monaincha on his pilgrimage. But it was in the Middle Ages that the place really became famous again. As a step towards the Counter-Reformation, in 1607, Pope Pius V gave indulgences, or gave certain benefits to famous places of pilgrimage, to revive the pilgrimage, like Compostela and places like that. And Monaincha was one of them. And on two occasions in the year, one was, I think, Palm Sunday, and the other was the Feast of St. Michael, where you got special plenary indulgences if you came here on pilgrimage. And at the beginning of the 17th century, in 1609 to 1611, huge numbers. I mean, the state papers in 1609 record, and this is recorded in the state papers, that on a Sunday in Monaincha, 15,000 people gathered at Monaincha, and some say many more. Now that's a huge number when you think of this small place here. It also conjures up, of course, the whole idea of how were they catered for? What were the social implications? I mean, who fed them? Where did they sleep? How did they get here? 15,000 people. We do know there's a famous case recorded. Conor O'Devaney, who was one of the martyrs of that time, he records how the women pilgrims were raped by the garrison of the town. One of the most famous pilgrims of all, of course, if you could call him a pilgrim, was Ludolf von Munchausen, who came in 1590. He was from northern Germany, but he had read about the 31st wonder of the world, and he wanted to visit here. And he came landed in Waterford, walked all the way up by Carrick-on-Suir up through Tipperary, landed at Shanross, got a monk there to row him out, and he was on the island, and he talked about the people going around doing the rounds in their bare feet, 8 times around, and then at the end of it, if you could stand up against the high cross and put your arms behind you and touch your hands behind, your sins were forgiven you. That was the big thing. But it's all recorded. It's a fascinating story. His diary survives, and he tells this story. The Franciscans used this place, Monaincha, Donatus, Mooney, as sort of to get people to go to confession and penitence and so on. So it was a very vibrant place at the beginning of the 16th century. In fact, as you know, the Reformation, 1540, the monastery was closed, and we know that it held land as far away as Kinnity and so on. But in 1622, Bishop Ryder, who was the Protestant Bishop of Killaloe, wrote that at Monaincha, the church and chancel are up, meaning that they were in repair, but shut up against the minister and reserved for Mass. So there you are, 80 years after the Reformation, Mass was still being publicly celebrated at Monaincha. And as a small, reminder of the pilgrims there, found when the lake was drained was the pilgrim's bottle. That is a bottle of earthenware origin that was probably used by a pilgrim who went elsewhere in Europe on pilgrimage and came and lost it then at Monaincha. Maybe what was inside in the bottle, he finished it all and just threw it away. But that was found, and in fact it was used, bought by at Birchgrove auction, and it was used at the last Eucharistic Congress in 1932 as a symbol of pilgrimage. Today, And in recent times, we have revived the pilgrimage. In 1974, wonderful day that 2,000 people walked from town with confraternity banners and so on, and Mass was celebrated on the altar. And I gave the sermon. It was only 5 minutes though, but it was a good little sermon. And at various times since, different groups have gathered here to celebrate Ireland's famous place. So we're at Birchgrove House. You can't really miss it. It's the biggest house before you hit the T-junction again. So what you passed on the road coming down is when the road went around a high wall. That's the estate of Monaincha House, because all of this area became the landed estates of the Birches, the Birch family. And there were two principal brothers, George and James, who in 1850 divided all of this land between them, and one built Monaincha House, the other had built Birchgrove House. Here it's Birchgrove House I want to talk about, and the map shows you the general area here. The Birches were quite extensive landlords, but they remain, and it was they denied burials to ordinary people at Monaincha, and it was their burials that are inside in the chancel as well. Meant to say when we were inside in the chancel, just refer to the tombs there, because the more money you had, you see, the farther in you could get. And I love the little doggerel, or the 4 lines that somebody in England directed to be written on his tombstone, and it's because he knew he would never get in far up the chancel. So he wrote, "Here lie I at the chancel door, here lie I because I'm poor. The farther in, the more you pay. Here lie I, as warm as day." Well, anybody could say that. Here at Birchgrove House itself, which is an interesting house too, but it also was the location of Roscrea whiskey, and in fact you can see the remnants or the outhouses of Roscrea whiskey. And Roscrea whiskey, believe it or not, was very famous at the end of the 18th century into the 19th century. A drop of Roscrea was spoken of at the same time as a drop of paddy or a drop of power now, and in fact it's in many of the writings of the time, including all Carleton's novels, would refer to, after dinner they would have a drop of Roscrea. And thankfully, believe it or not, 4 bottles of Roscrea whiskey still survive, and owned by a gentleman here in Roscrea, and that is the heading there for it. Sadly, Father Matthew played puck with the distilleries of Ireland, and by 1850 it was up for sale. You see the sale poster there of the distillery. It didn't sell then, and the flax industry came after that. The birches there are no birches now left in Roscrea, but they're all over the world, and there's hardly a month goes by but I would get a query or you'd hear about another birch. They went to Canada and Australia and so on, and they're very proud of their lineage, and one of them put together a genealogical book called The Birch Tree that is now in the public library here. So they're they're part certainly of the story of Roscrea, peripheral to the story of monastic Roscrea. But Roscrea's monastic story doesn't end with Monaincha or Shan Ross. We had the Franciscans, other friars, came in the 15th century to Roscrea, but the living monasticism of the area is carried on today by the monks of Mount St. Joseph, the Cistercian monks who came to Roscrea in 1878 on land the other side of Roscrea, but interestingly part of the lands of Monaincha. The 2 townlands that they're of Ballishkinnock itself and Clonkraken were lands that were given to the monks of Monaincha. So you have this living link between Monaincha and the monks of Roscrea. So our short story about a place that has a long story is coming to an end. I hope that someday you'll get a chance to visit Monaincha, the 31st wonder of the world, one of Ireland's most sacred places. Say a prayer there sometime.